Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Our Vision, Our Voice, which is presented in conjunction with StudVoice.org. I'm your host, Steve Figurelli. Our first six episodes are airing as part of Student Voice in a Box, a resource to support teachers with best practices as they endeavor to incorporate authentic student voice into their classrooms. Today, we are really excited to have Teresa Soares with us, and I'd like to introduce her now. Teresa, how are you?
Hi, Steve. I'm doing well this morning. Thank you.
Great. So, just a little bit about the mission of our podcast. We wanted to hear from students about their experience just through school and things that motivated you through your classes, where you felt you've learned um, the most, and what teachers can take away. The idea is to have a resource for teachers to listen to and learn from students. So often it's the students learning from the teachers, but students can teach us so much as educators, and that's the premise of the podcast. And I again thank you for joining me today. So
Sure.
just like to start by asking, just a little bit about you. Your experience in school, sort of, just your life as a student, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll just start off with, my background and sort of who I am. I grew up in California, the Monterey Peninsula, so, suburban America. Went to public schools for elementary school, and for middle and high school, I had an interesting sort of a Catholic school, private Catholic school experience. Which was definitely, certainly very interesting and very different than the public school education that I had an opportunity to have access to, before I got to high school. And now I'm in college. I attend a four-year private liberal arts college in Oakland, California. It's called Mills College. It's an all-women's college for undergraduate. It's about 1,000 undergrads there, and they have postgraduate degrees that are co-ed as well. I think for me, growing up, I was sort of identified with sort of this informal reading comprehension disorder, this reading disability, a learning difference, when I was in first grade. And thankfully, I had veteran teachers and learning specialists at my elementary school that I think were able to kind of identify issues with my reading, and my parents as well were very good at sort of helping me through my homework and helping me to kind of learn how to read. But my teachers noticed early on that although I was very bright, I had incredible difficulty sort of reading and keeping up with everyone else. And for me, that was always a struggle and still is a struggle, now that I'm in college. But obviously, with different coping strategies and mechanisms, and it's been 20 years now, battling it in school. I've come up with quite a few strategies to get through the classroom now. But most of my um, educational sort of trajectory through school was really kind of, I think, determined and dominated by this learning disability and this learning difference. And I'll say that I'll say it's a learning disability, and then I'll say that it's a learning difference. And I'll just tell you right now, it's dyslexia. I have dyslexia, but I actually didn't find out that I was dyslexic officially until I was a senior in high school, because I decided that I needed to be formally diagnosed, with the proper paperwork and all of that, so I could, go to college and receive proper accommodations. But I think this brings me to a bigger problem that I think we have in America, and certainly something that I've noticed in talking to other students as well, and something that I certainly faced, was that in elementary school I was in a very sort of supportive environment that was very inclusive, of students who learned differently and people who had learning disabilities. I had a lot of friends who had ADD, had a lot of friends who had dysgraphia and dyslexia and other sorts of unnamed learning disabilities and things like that. But as we began to kind of go through middle school and high school, a lot of us sort of hid our disabilities, and we didn't want to be different, and we didn't want to be labeled the stupid kid. And so a lot of us just kind of fell behind, and uh, I mean, I found other ways, to compensate through sports, and I started building computers in high school and all of that, and I got a really great job when I was in high school. But unfortunately, I think I was just looking at some statistics, and I think it's from the National Center on Educational Statistics. They found that the high school dropout rate among students with learning disabilities is twice as high as everyone else. And I just thought that that was amazing because we have such a huge emphasis, really that sort of targeted on addressing high school dropout issues and trying to increase the number of individuals across America, especially within urban centers, that graduate from high school. But oftentimes, I think we overlook the, very down to the minute level of the brain and how students learn. And we talk about literacy and the importance of being able to read by third grade, and being able to reach these benchmarks. But at the same time, I think through my experience, although I did grow up in suburban America, and I did, I think, attend relatively well-resourced schools. My experience with dyslexia has really sort of opened my mind and made me quite a bit more aware about the access that I had to the ability, to learn to read, despite and in light of the challenges that I had. And that's why I'm constantly thinking about all of the work that teachers continue to put in and day out, in trying to prepare our students to be successful, and to lead successful lives as well. So, just where I am right now, this summer I'm taking summer classes at Stanford, and I, decided that I wanted to focus on my writing this summer. That was a big thing for me. To no surprise, because I have dyslexia, I have incredible difficulty with processing speed and organization when it comes to written language. And I decided that the important thing for me to do at this stage, I'm kind of halfway through my college career so far. I'm going into my junior year here, starting up in a couple weeks actually. But I decided that I needed to kind of buckle down and focus on my writing. So that's sort of where I am right now.
Wow, thank you for sharing. And so, just thinking about the differences that you saw between an elementary setting and the secondary setting, social and developmental issues aside, what did you see as patterns of behavior, perhaps in the classroom setting, and through your academics, that created this connection between how you felt supported in elementary school and perhaps has how you didn't feel as supported as you ascended grade levels in secondary schools?
I missed the first part of that question, Steve.
So just thinking about the juxtaposition between the way you felt supported at the elementary level and perhaps not as supported at the secondary level.
Sure, sure.
Can you speak a little bit more toward maybe patterns of behavior that teachers or support staff exuded maybe at the elementary side of things that weren't perhaps there as you ascended grade levels?
Sure, sure. You know, Public schools, at least, in my experience, the public school that I attended had veteran educators, that had taught 10 or 20 years, and they had experience working with students who obviously learn differently. Um, and they were very, very skilled at creating a connection between the parent and the student. And so there was sort of it was almost like there were three of us in the classroom, throughout the school year, even though that wasn't the case. It was myself and the teacher. We were always in the class. But I'll just give you an anecdote. I remember sitting in the third grade, and I used to come into the class, and I used to have this strategy because we would do silent sustained reading, and I would find a kid that had to read to themselves out loud, and I would go and sit next to them so I could listen to what the story was about, instead of having to sit there and having to read it myself, because it was so hard. It took me so long. There's no way I could have ever, finished. But what was so interesting about that, I think, was that, my teachers knew that. And they knew that I had struggled through that. But because there was a dialogue that was created between the teacher and my parents and myself, we were able to discuss how, although I learned differently and although, I read much more slowly than everyone else, that there were still things that I could contribute, positively to the classroom. And so there was, in elementary school, I think there was it was a much more positive experience because I think there was more of a light that was shown on the differences aspect of learning differently. And I think that was largely due in part because I was encouraged to learn differently in elementary school, and I was encouraged to embrace dyslexia as a learning difference and not as a disability. And I think part of that has to do with the personability that I had, and really the connection that I think my teacher had made with me personally, down to the level, to the fact that I wasn't just a student that showed up every day that did my homework, but that I was a human being and that I was someone who genuinely learned differently and had something positive to contribute to the larger classroom beyond just worksheets and dioramas and book reports and things like that. And so just to juxtapose it to what I had in middle school and high school, I think in middle school and in high school, I began to sort of run with the herd a little bit more. It's so interesting. People who know me know that I have this herd-like metaphor that I use to kind of describe, unfortunately, the atmosphere and the tracking sometimes that we seem to adopt in high schools. And for me, my high school experience was more. It was less about being different and being proud of being different, and it was more about trying to, I think, prescribe to a set of tracks, moving towards this idea of success, going to college and going to a certain kind of college and taking certain types of AP courses. And really, I think the point I'm trying to get at is there was more of an emphasis I felt that I was forced to put on being like everyone else than being different. And I think that the biggest difference was I had a few teachers in high school and middle school that kind of did reach out to me and say, it's okay to learn differently, it's okay. And they were the ones that really kind of changed my mind when I was a senior in high school and kind of helped me realize that I needed to kind of relook at and re-embrace, the disability and get it re-diagnosed because it was the responsible thing to do going into college. But in terms of that, as we get older, as students get older, and as we begin to become more independent, we really value our freedom to make our own decisions. And my decision when I was in middle school and high school was to push the learning difference and the disability aside. And my parents and most of my teachers, they gave me that freedom and they respected that. And that was, that's that's ultimately what had happened. And that was, thankfully I was able to stay in school and, continue on because I had the support to, pursue other things. But I unfortunately don't think that that is the case for a lot of other high school students. And I am constantly thinking about that, constantly thinking about, how I was able to navigate the system, and how so many others are, forced out of the system. And I'm constantly thinking about how we can change that. And I do think that teachers have a unique opportunity to help with that. But we put a lot on our teachers, and there's a lot riding on teaching. And there's a lot of great things that happen in classrooms. But I think that it's sort of an all hands on deck approach when I think about fixing a lot of these larger educational issues. And it's so interesting because, the questions that you ask me are about me and they're about my experience. But the personal has really become political for me. And it's so hard for me now to think only about my experience in terms of just my experience. I've sort of really began to open it up and broaden it and really think about sort of the broader implications for others. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I know it was juxtaposed plus the bigger picture, but I hope I tried to get at it for you.
No, I I think it was an amazing answer. And I'm thinking about that parent teacher student connection that you had said was so strong at the elementary level, and you seem to dwindle a little bit, at the secondary level. Have you seen in your experience, or do you have any suggestions or advice from a student's point of view who has experienced difficulty academically, with literacy in the classroom, to help secondary folks forge a stronger connection between the parents themselves and the students, because it is so vital to not only the success of the individual student, but the larger success of our public schools. Oftentimes there's a misconception in a sense that it's sort of parent versus teacher, when in reality, we're all on the same side, which is for the benefit of each an individual student. So what would you offer, what could you suggest to help secondary teachers really establish or foster that connection between the school and home?
Sure. I think for me, because I was sort of forced to look beyond what was given to me and what was offered to me in the classroom in order to stay there and to be present and to learn. And what I mean by that is, having a learning disability, reading is difficult. And so you have to find other ways to find fulfillment and meaning while you're in the classroom. And that's something that I certainly did. I can't speak for everyone who has a learning disability, but that's something that I did. And one of the biggest things that I found kept me going and kept me fueled towards learning and towards investigating and towards, kind of having inquiry and pursuing that inquiry in the classroom as I continued, and still continue today. It was conversations that I had with my teachers and my professors that were oftentimes outside of the classroom, or they were after school, or they were maybe in between classes. It was finding ways to connect with my teachers about things that I couldn't relate to in the classroom. And so that became integral for me, because, I did my work and I turned it in, but, there's really, it becomes superficial in a way, having a reading disability, because, you can read what's on the page by the time you're in high school. At least I could, but I did it so much more slowly than everyone else did. And it was very hard to make meaning and to find value and reinforcement and confidence in what I could present to the world in just filling out worksheets and, taking exams. And so I had to really find ways to connect with my teachers. And one of the ways that I did that was I would have conversations with them about, how they became a teacher, and, what their school experience was like, and asking them questions about, what were some of the mistakes that you made, going through your life, and, what are some of the things that you would actually, like to teach me, or what are some of the things that you don't feel like you can teach me because of the constraints of the classroom, or sort of, the constraints of the textbooks, or, whatever the constraints are. And I think the point I'm trying to make is I was, I think, encouraged to really find ways to connect with the professor, or, with the teacher, just outside of what was prescribed to me or what was assigned to me. And I think that that's where the challenge is, for teachers trying to sort of find a pedagogical way to design that personal experience on a broader level that can include everyone. And for me, I think going through high school, especially, because that's what I always go back to, my favorite teacher, I had her in the morning. Her name was Mrs. Little. She was my English teacher. And she was the first class that I had in the morning. It was AP World Literature is what I had. I think, yeah, it was AP. It was an AP English class. I think it was World Lit. And it was at 8:13 in the morning. And I would drive my Volvo station wagon 45 minutes from Pacific Grove to Salinas. And I would get to school 30 minutes early so I could talk to her. And, I was a senior in high school, and of course I had senioritis. But the best part of my day was talking to her about things that maybe had to deal with school or maybe things that didn't have to deal with school. But she kind of became a mentor for me in a way. And for me, at least, I think going through high school, it was about finding these what I call micro mentoring opportunities. And I think that's why I just love to talk to teachers so much now, is because there's a reason we get up in the morning and we want to educate each other, and we want to learn and we want to ask questions. And I think there's something magical inside of us where we like to talk to each other and we like to listen to one another. And so for me, going through high school, I think the biggest thing, in middle school, the biggest thing was finding those micro mentoring opportunities, ways to connect to what makes us human, while still being in the midst of, what I call the herd, in the midst of what I call high school and sort of what seems like jumping through hoops and all of that, because I was forced to kind of see beyond that. And in many ways, although I did, struggle through school, and there were many nights where I turned in papers that I wish I could have had more time on, and there were tests that I wish I could have done better on, and of course there were report cards that I wish I could have, scored higher on, and things like that. I always look back fondly on the conversations like the ones that I had with, my English teacher, Mrs. Little, every morning, and just different things like that. I look for tangible things that you'll remember with your students, and to students, look for tangible things that you can remember with your teachers and your peers as well, and look for those micro mentoring opportunities too. I think that's some insight that I can give.
Yeah, and it's just so powerful. As I was listening to you respond, I couldn't help but think of a quote from one of sort of my inspirations as an educator, and her name is Angela Myers, and she's a former second grade teacher from the Midwest, and she said, if you don't first secure students' hearts, you don't have a shot at their brains. And the relationships that teachers can facilitate with students is so critical. You know, beyond the academics, it's just that personal connection that you spoke so eloquently about. It's just so critical to, Rita Pearson in an amazing TED Talk called "Every Kid Needs a Champion" says that kids don't learn from people they don't like, and you illustrated that so perfectly about the connection and the um, just the power that teachers have to help guide and really create a meaningful experience that's beyond the content for students. So thinking through the your school experience and the notion of why I've started this podcast in terms of helping or serving as a resource for teachers to incorporate authentic student voice in the classroom. Um, what does the idea of student voice mean to you?
Oh man, yeah, I've thought about this question, and I think the biggest thing for me is, and I continue to go back to this, um, and I've said this many times, but to me, I think student voice and the concept of student voice is not just about allowing young people to talk about the issues they care about. I think really student voice at its core is about hearing the integrity of what we're teaching and of what we're learning. And what I mean by that is if we really work to create a democratic sphere, whether it be in our classrooms or in our schools, or much more largely in our districts or in our states, or, in our country, because it's great to continue going up in our world, right? I think the point that I'm trying to make is that if we're truly teaching students to be active citizens and to be citizens that I think care about the world that they live in, there's no reason that we should teach them to do that when they get out of school. We should teach them to do that while they're in school. And I think student voice is really at the crux of that. I think it's really at the basis of that. And, I'm not a teacher yet. I could be a teacher. I would love to be a teacher. and maybe that's somewhere in my future. So I can't speak for teachers, but from a from a student's perspective, um, I think for me going through school on a just on a personal level, there are ways that student voice could be, I think, um, designed to be um, productive in the classroom and designed to be healthy within institutions. And I think oftentimes I'm always kind of thinking from an administrator standpoint as well. I'm not an administrator either, but when I'm in school settings, I'm trying to think outside of the classroom, and I think for obvious reasons I've been pushed to do that as well. Um, but student voice essentially for me is the ability to really bring out what learning and teaching looks like when it is engaged, when students are invited to be participatory. And my good friend Jordan Howard, who is absolutely amazing, she is a student at UCLA and she's just a powerhouse activist. She's really quite something. She said something really eloquent, and I thought it hit the nail on the head when talking about student voice. And Jordan said, she said, student voice, we don't just want to be on the menu, we want to be at the table. And she was right. There are so many educational conversations that are taking place, and we have now corporations, and we have philanthropists, and policymakers, and parents, and teachers. And, why can't students be there? And when we talk about student voice, we're not talking about the tokenized type of student voice where you just kind of place a student at the table and say, okay, we've got student voice, so you can just check it off on a box. No, we're talking about the real kind of student voice, the kind of student voice that's sort of uncensored, that's raw, that speaks the truth, that has integrity, that really begins to discuss the things that need to be talked about, the things that need to change, because there's nothing like having a perspective from the people that are working right there on the ground. And that's the crux of it. And I'll just round out, the question with what I started with. I think student voice at its core is really about hearing the integrity of what we're teaching and of what we're learning, not just for students, but for everyone that's involved in education. And I'll just leave it there.
Well, and I think that's just so poignant, and I appreciate the passion with which you speak. And so now, thinking with that um, idea of what student voice is authentically, have did you feel there was a time in your academic career, pre-K through 12, or even through your college experience, where that voice has been authentically integrated as part of classroom instruction? And if so, could you share a story about when that has happened?
Yeah, so I can just give you a small story. So, small little anecdote. When I was applying, um, yep, when I was applying for extra time accommodations for the ACT exam when I was applying to college, I was denied accommodations because I didn't provide enough paperwork, proving that I had a legitimate learning disability. And, for a whole set of reasons, this got me very interested in, the process of standardized testing and of education and of what this kind of looks like. And it really sort of internally, I think, opened my mind to standardization and, what students are able to do when they're given certain opportunities to show up and do their best, and what happens when students are forced to, comply within systems, but they're not given the opportunity to, perform fairly. And I just have to share this anecdote because it opened. That's where student voice became real for me. Because before, I think student voice can be authentic. it comes from within students, and it has to come from somewhere genuine within students. And so I think oftentimes we, oh yeah, student voice is great. Who wouldn't want student voice? We were always talking about that. But I think that before we can have student voice become real in schools, it has to be sparked from something within students. And for me, mine was sparked from a very brief moment when I was able to kind of understand and maybe see, just for a brief moment, what it's like to be marginalized. And of course, we could argue about whether or not it was actually marginalization or in terms of privilege and all of that. But the point I'm trying to make is that for me, now that I'm in college, student voice has become real. And so I'll give you an example. I serve on the student life committee that helps inform the board of trustees at my college. And we're doing some interesting work in terms of wellness is concerned at the college level. And I think for me, having that experience, even though it has nothing to do with wellness, but 3 years ago, I think going through the process of being denied accommodations and sort of seeing this, what injustice sort of looks like, it gave me a place to kind of bring my voice out of. And for me, if you take, I always take the etymology of the word education, but edus, right? EDUS, it means to bring out. And for me, that's, again, going back to the concept of student voice, but that's what it is. You're bringing the voice out of the student. And so when we talk about how we're educating students, we're having I don't want to say a transaction of knowledge, but we're having a transfer of knowledge and wisdom and experience between teachers and students and communities and schools. And student voice is the opportunity to bring out what we learn and what we interact with within schools. And for me, I was able to create an experience inside of me that I could then bring out, and I can now share with the world, and it interacts with everything that I do now. And I think for me, it was the pinnacle of that experiential circumstance, of sort of sitting there with this accommodations letter in my hand that said, no, you can't have extra time, and knowing that I would have to take the test and apply to college with test scores that didn't reflect, what I was actually capable of. It was knowing that made me realize that my voice mattered. And I think that there's another concept there too, is that if we create systems to encourage students to speak, then that's fine. But we also need to be able to value what they have to say. And when we create ways for students to speak, then we need to create ways to take what they're saying and to I think take the meaning of what they're saying and to actually make it real. And there's an opportunity for, I think, collaboration and continued learning, I think, through action. And so for me, the biggest experience that I can just give to you now is what's taking place for me while I'm in college, is that I had an experience that opened my eyes and made me realize the importance of my voice. And now that I'm in college, I have found a way to participate, through this the committee with the Board of Trustees. And every quarter I'm asked to attend meetings and share my voice with the board about issues that students are facing in terms of wellness. And that is an example, the biggest example that I can give to you at this moment about sort of how student voice became personal. And I've now kind of found ways to enact it and make it real so others, I think, can benefit and learn from it at a school level.
And I think it's so important that eliciting the voice from the student is really only half the equation. The teachers have to be willing and ready and poised to listen and to hear that voice, and then to act on it and act with it. And just by saying it is sort of superficial in the sense, and I think you nailed it with the necessity for teachers to and administrators and legislators to not only usher in a spot at the table, but authentically listen to and consider and then act on the words and the passions that are being spoken by the students in our schools. So I think that was brilliantly said. And you spoke about personally finding sort of that motive to share your voice with folks. How do you think teachers can um, help other students who perhaps didn't have or don't have the same experiences that you do find their voice and incorporate it into lessons or learning experiences within the classroom?
Great question. I think, at least for me, when I was going through the experience, I think of realizing that my voice had meaning and realizing that my voice was necessary in the world. Which, going back to, the story that I gave about, being denied accommodations and all of that, at the time, I'm not sure if I would have been comfortable sharing that story with my peers and sharing my story with what was going on in the classroom. And I'm not saying that this happens to every student, but I do think that there is, of course, concerns about confidentiality and concerns about, I think, the personal growth that students have when coming to terms and understanding the value of their voice. And so, as I mentioned, I'm not a teacher, so I can't speak for teachers, but I think the point I'm trying to make is that I think teachers there's a unique opportunity to sort of have students realize that the things that are happening in our lives are much broader than we might perhaps realize. Um, and that was certainly the case in my particular example. I realized that maybe I just wasn't the only one who was being denied accommodations. Maybe this turns out to be a larger problem, or things like that. So what the point I'm trying to make is, there are different things that happen with students in high school. We might not win prom king or queen, or we might not be chosen to go to a certain college, or we might fail our driver's test, or there are certain examples, real world examples of these things. In certain neighborhoods and parts of the country, we lose students to street violence and gang violence. In certain parts of the country, we have places where students unfortunately are incarcerated or thrown out of the system. So it's not just, I'm not just speaking for students from suburban neighborhoods, but there's a whole array of different types of experiences that students have. And so from a teacher's perspective, I think if you're able to connect with students based on the experiences that they're having outside of the classroom, and then help them find ways to channel that experience and channel that energy towards learning, then I think you create a meaningful and fulfilling opportunity for student voice to become real within the classroom, because it's the process of education is not just about going to school and doing assignments and getting grades. It's about something more, and that something more is what we have to do, I think, as teachers in terms of bringing things out of students to then engage in the classroom. And what we're bringing out of students sometimes has to happen, I think, in between class periods, and maybe it doesn't happen on worksheets or in essays. I think we have to continue to sort of think outside the box in terms of really, really reaching and meeting students halfway. And I think that's the beauty of student voice, as well, is that it's sort of, I don't want to say the olive branch, but I think it's sort of the epitome of meeting students halfway, is you have teachers and students who then kind of create this bridge where conversation and action can actually take place within an educational setting. And I think it breaks down power dynamics, and that's a big thing in school settings. When I was able to see my teachers as fellow peers that I could help navigate the educational system with, instead of gatekeepers or sort of barriers, or people who could deny me the opportunity to move forward. When I could break down that image and I could see them as peers and people who I could learn with and ask questions with and explore with, then that's when I really began to realize that there was more to school. There was more to education than just school. And for me, that realization certainly came in college. And I tell people this all the time. It's like I didn't like school until I got to Mills. But, really for me, college was a complete game changer for me. And, I think it's funny, I just gave a speech the other night in my persuasive speaking class about, whether or not people should graduate in 3 or 4 years when they're in college. And as I was giving the speech, I was thinking about, how I wish I could, stay in my undergrad for 5 or 6 years. And it's just so interesting because I think that is the sign that I think I made the right decision in terms of where I, chose to go. But I think the point I'm trying to get at is that somehow through elementary school and middle school and high school, despite having a learning disability, which so often everyone expected to sort of thwart me, and it did. Now that I'm in college, it's kind of forced me to find new ways of getting through school and new ways of seeing learning. And in that way, student voice has sort of become natural to me. It's become a part of my learning experience. I think it is my learning style, actually. And I think that it's a learning style that perhaps can be universal. Perhaps student voice is a learning style that I hope maybe we can think about having it be accessible to everyone and not just certain students. I don't know. These are important questions, I think, as well. So I'll leave that question there.
Wow. And so, I know you're going to take some classes, finish out your college career, but what's next for you? Um, where do you, I mean, the passion is there, the wisdom is there, the experience, is helping guide you, but what's next for you? Where do you see yourself in, 5, 10 years?
Yeah, great question, Steve. It's so interesting because as a young person, people are always asking, where are you going to go? Where are you going to go? And I remember growing up, I felt like there was such an importance that I felt like I needed to put myself in a box, and I needed to say, okay, firefighter, or CEO, or princess, or lawyer, or something. Like it needed to be something. And really, up until maybe just a couple of months ago, I realized that that was counterintuitive to what I had adopted now as my learning strategy. And I am thinking now that graduate school is now a possibility. Assistive technology for students with print disabilities, and in terms of screen readers and accommodations and different ways of accessing reading materials through technology have really, I think, allowed students with learning differences to really be able to access material and to do things that perhaps would have been barriers in the past. And for me, I have had an opportunity this summer through the Schwab Learning Center at Stanford to really explore a lot of this assistive technology. And I think it's been this summer that I've sort of realized that grad school is a possibility. And a grad school in terms of maybe pursuing a career in the social sciences and sociology, perhaps a graduate degree in anthropology, perhaps something centering around education. I'm not sure. I'd like to speak. I'd like to write books. I probably will end up becoming a teacher, so that's great. I can get to join a lot of really great people in this country in being a teacher.
And your potential former future students will be incredibly lucky to have you as their educator.
Oh, thank you, Steve. Thank you. I hope so. It just I think teacher is a possibility. Eventually, I would like to go to law school though, because I've always been thinking about the big picture, and I see that there are changes that I really think that I'm in a unique place. I think to be able to help change, and for me, if I do enter a teaching career, I want to do it with experience that I think I can relate to my students with. And by that I mean I want to have the real world experience that I can bring back to them and say, okay, here's what I experienced throughout the world, and I think that that'll help them, I think, sort of relate to what's going on in the text. And I just find it so interesting because really growing up and going through the school system, I never thought that I would become a teacher. In fact, people would tell me, they'd say, oh, you'd be a great teacher. And I couldn't figure out why they would tell me that because I had dyslexia and I hated school. But things have just changed. And the biggest thing for me is that I've always told myself to keep an open mind. And going back to your original question, what's next for me? I'm trying to keep an open mind, Steve. And maybe graduate school is a possibility. I don't want to close any doors at this point. Maybe I'll attend a graduate school of education, or maybe I'll get my teaching credential, or I don't know. Maybe I'll become a principal. I'm keeping the doors open at this point in time. And with keeping that mindset, I'm also trying to focus on, within the last 2 years of my undergraduate career, really ensuring that I have two things. One is the skills necessary to be successful in a career of my choice, whether that be in graduate school or after graduate school. And the second thing is really focusing on the things that you don't get in the classroom in terms of your assignments and your readings and your writings. It's the personal experiences that you're able to interact with, and the personal experiences that you're able to kind of have within a college setting without real world, I think, repercussions. And in getting at that second item is really focusing on what it means to be well educated and what it means to ask critical questions that sort of reveal what it means to, again, be well educated and to live a life that is fulfilling. And I'm always battling to kind of connect the two, these two sort of concepts, but I realize that they really are integral to having a successful education, because I think you need to be able to contribute to the world and be productive, but at the same time you also need to be able to think differently, and you need to be able to, I think, critically analyze everything that you're doing in terms of being productive and questioning. I think that's incredibly important as well. So to answer your question, what is next for me? I don't know. I hope that I'll be a little older. I hope I'll be a little wiser, and hopefully I'll be a little sassier as well. I don't know. But stay tuned, I guess, right?
Absolutely. This has been an absolutely amazing conversation, and I thank you, for your time today. I did have one final question. As teachers listen to your voice today, what final words would you leave with them?
Are you there, Steve?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay.
So I don't know if that question got cut off, so I'll just pose it again. But just one final question, and again, this has been an absolutely amazing conversation. So as teachers listen to your voice today, what final words would you leave with them?
I know I'm going to be thinking about this question and how I should have answered it for the next week, but I'll give you the biggest thing right now it's the froth on my latte right now. It's what's at the top of what I have to say, at the top of what I'm thinking of. Um, I think I had a unique experience going through the education system and being able to make it through having a learning difference and having a learning disability. There were a lot of obstacles that I faced that people helped me jump. People helped me get through. And I was able to make it through the system. I had good parents. I had a lot of privilege coming from a suburban household. I had very experienced teachers, and I had, I think, administrators who genuinely made an effort, I think, to get to know the students who potentially could have been problematic or had issues, and I was one of them, you know. But the point that I'm trying to make, and if there's one final thing I think I want to leave you with here, is that the students who learn differently and the students who might be perceived as being troublemakers or having issues, whether they do or don't, I think have very specific ways of being able to contribute brilliant insight to the classroom and to the learning communities. And it takes a lot of extra effort, but it's extra effort that's really worth it to make connections with those students. Because now that I'm thinking about it in my college setting, that's what I've learned to be able to do. And I've learned to be able to, I think, make connections, brilliant connections with the community as a whole. And I'm now active with the school in making it a better place. And it's not a self-serving experience anymore. School is not a self-serving experience anymore. It's an experience where I wake up in the morning and in addition to doing my work and getting it done, for all of my individual classes, I'm making sure that everyone else is okay, that we're getting through, and that the school is becoming a better place. And it's that extra effort that my teachers put in to make connections with me. I think it's that extra effort that my parents made, and I think it's the extra effort that just the community as a whole made to get me through the education system that has now sort of opened my eyes to what's possible. And so I'll leave you with that, Steve. It's been really a wonderful interview, and I love the questions. And your students are incredibly lucky to have you as well. I can tell you're a great guy, and I wish you the best of luck with everything that you're doing, and I hope that we can stay in touch.
Absolutely. Teresa, thank you again so much for being with us today, and just the powerful message that you leave for educators and legislators and parents and students. It's been a pleasure and an honor to talk to you today. So thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Really appreciate it.
And we'll be watching to see what happens next. So we'll stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve.
All right. Take care, Teresa.
You too.